This is my snooker app for the graphics programming course. This table is a sprite image, which has a saturated cloth area, as you can see in these images. Now, I chose to do this because, one, I was able to take advantage of the matter.js renderer and render the sprite images, but it also allowed me to enable this extension feature that I have, which is a nice customizable, extensible user interface for adjusting things on the fly. So, like, without having to reload, we can change the colors, change the background images, and like I said, those background images, they're saturated in the middle, and they're scaled specifically for this cloth area here, the saturated cloth area. This allows you to have uh, images that have like different borders, and it'll all still scale the same. Some of these are kind of ugly. You can see that some of these they're not like you can use different sizes, but you just got to keep track of the cloth area here. And really heavily went with the route of using the matter.js renderer because it's very similar to using the provided render vertices function. Instead of that, you get a lot of features out of the renderer, and that matter.js provides using sprites for one. For instance, these balls are all sprites. These are the images here that I created for all the different colors. And the pool cue is a sprite. Not only do you get to take advantage of that, but you get some very cool features that you can get out of there, like wireframe display, collision display, velocity. This I did so you can see the actual cushion area, the cushion collision area. I also made the table as close to scale using real world units as possible because rather than for this zoom feature, rather than simply just drawing it at a lower scale, it actually scales the whole matter.js world, which is nice and convenient, but it had some setbacks. Like if we go to the table and resize, we get to take advantage of the composite.scale, and it will recursively scale everything except for the sprite. So you have to go through and rescale the sprite images. But this had some problems where if you rescaled it, the physics would be different. That's why I had to go with scaling everything as close you could to real world unit measurements, and then converting it to pixels. That way, you can shoot the ball, and the physics all scale the same, even though you've rescaled the entire world. Now let's start over here. Another thing I added was the ability to rotate, and this zoom function, which I've shown. But these cool features you can get out of the renderer, like the wireframes and the collision and velocity displays, if we just summon up a bunch of balls and then we're prompted to press the space bar when you start and you get the cue ball. But you can see the collisions and you can see the velocity vectors, which is nice. Now, what I wanted to do, but I never got around to, was add a feature to slow down the actual engine itself, and you could really see what's going on. I never got around to it though, but the extension is fully customizable, and you can just add more and more features to it. It's fairly simple. You just gotta add new menus and stuff, which is all worked out in the code. But let's go back to the start. So we got our press 1 for the normal setup, press 2 for the random red, press 3 for random all, which is mirrored in the menu. You can click that for the reset. Random red, which is 2, random all, which is 3. Those should probably be flipped around in the menu. Make a little more sense, but so that's most of my extension, and yeah, it's very handy because you don't have to reset it to change a lot of the features. So back to this. Now it starts off. Well, let's just start off with a reset game, and you were prompted to press spacebar to place the cue ball. Once you press spacebar, you're given a cue ball, and in this state, the cue ball is a sensor. It collides, but it doesn't interact. So it registers these collisions, but it doesn't interact, and it's disabled from the interacting with these other sensors. The pockets themselves are sensors as well. The reason for this is because if you want to place the cue ball, and you got to place it in the zone. Well, if there's a ball there, you shouldn't be able to place on it. So that's why it has a sensor. So you got to get away from it. And once you've placed the ball, as you can see, a cue is generated. It's attached to the cue ball, and it rotates around on the opposite side of the cue ball, pointing towards this crosshair cursor, which is the P5 crosshair. And it's not the best crosshair. It's kind of weird the way it displays. It's kind of then you aim, and once you aim, as you can see, you're prompted to hold space to change you start a shot. Once you start holding space, the shot starts powering up. Now you are committed to that location, but the power of the shot is directly proportional to how far the cue is drawn back, and you're prompted to release the space to take the shot. Now, when you do release it, the cue will be launched towards the cue ball with a velocity vector that's calculated proportional to the cue power and how far it is in its shot distance. And when it hits, it will not lose that velocity. The cue itself will lose velocity, the body itself, but the cue will also have that velocity vector just stored as a variable, and will impart that exact velocity onto the cue when it's collided, like so. And when you collide with a ball, it tells you the color ball. When you collide with the cushion, it just says bounce because I don't think the user needs to know exactly which cushion. And then when you collide with a pocket with the cue ball, you scratch and it's taken away. Now you're prompted to press the space bar again, and you get the cue ball. After you've taken a shot, if everything is disabled other than you can reset it, but it waits until all the balls reach uh, idle state, which is just a minimum speed value that they have before they're considered to be immobile. And then if you're given the cue back and you're ready to take your next shot. But it's my understanding that in snooker you have to sink a red ball and then you can choose a color to sink. But however, in this you sink a red ball and then all the colors are at play, so you can just sink any one of them. However, like the requirements, if you sink two of them, that's a fault, and you won't get any of the points that are available to the balls. But if the colors are on and you only sink one color, you get the color value associated with the color ball. And I got that from Wikipedia. It had a table there. I don't know the exact rules, but it's fairly close. See, now we sunk red. You get 1 point for a red, and now the colors are on, and we can potentially sink a color ball. Although I'm not going to be able to, I'm sure. But anyway, yeah. So now the colors would be off. The advantage of going with the cue drawback method is it allows you to control the power, so you can have a softer shot like that, or a harder shot if you release it further. It is set up so that if you do sink two colors in a row, even if the colors are on, you get it's a fault, and it does notify you. However, I don't think we'd be able to sync two colors, but it's set up so that if I even sync one, let me try to sync one, there, color sunk when not on. So that's the same type of message you would get if the colors were on and you sunk two in a row, but I could spend hours trying to sync two colors in a row, and I still wouldn't do it. But yeah, so that's pretty much all the gameplay, I think, and I've displayed the extension features. Now we're going to look at some of the code. So it starts off in the main thing, main.js file, goes through some setup. We create a balls array, create a table to act as the world. We initialize some table properties. We add the balls array to the bodies of the table, and then we set the world as the table. And we start a new snooker game. We set up some additional collision interaction, which you can see here. You register all of these, and this is a event which at the start of a collision checks if collision that needs additional functionality is handled, and it order the parameters are passed in because order matters because they're not the same. So we register all of these, the snooker queue on the pocket, we log it, remove it, create the fading message for pocketing the queue all, let the game know that queues been pocketed. I chose to store the game under the engine because that just makes sense to me. And the engine's already a global, so if you need to access it, you can access it that way. But I really worked to avoid having any global access. Everything's passed in as best as I could. And then we get the red ball in the pocket. Does pretty much the same thing, although it lets the game know a red's been pocketed instead of cue ball. The color's been pocketed. The collision message, and it removes each of them. We got the cue ball colliding with cushions. It notifies the user. We got the cue ball on the red ball, the cue ball on the red ball, and that's just activating messages. We got the cue ball on the color ball, same thing. And the last one we have is the cue colliding with the cue ball, which tells the game to take the shot. Now, the game itself, it's a fairly simple loop. Uses these flags to coordinate with the P5 keyboard inputs because Matter.js doesn't really have functionality, so I go through the P5, as you can see here. There's just the key pressed, under the condition where the cue ball needs to be placed, it places it. If you're aiming the shot, it tells you the shot started. And then there's the released. If you're charging a shot, release the shot. Go back to the game. So got those there. So you start off and you got your normal cursor. It clears these intervals here, which check for keyboard inputs. And it clears the events, which checks for matter.js mouse events. So you get your normal cursor, sets the square 0. You're prompted to place a cue ball, as you've seen when you place the cue ball. So it clears any intervals because this is a return point after you've pocketed the cue ball. It'll return back here. So see, it'll go back here instead of going to the start. Then goes through, sets the prompt to place cue ball in D zone. Yeah, it enables the mouse placement, and it disables collision with pockets, and it turns it into a sensor so that it doesn't move the balls around as you're placing them. So, for instance, this doesn't hit anything, and that's like that. I think I mentioned this before, but that's so you can't place it on top. You have to place it there. After that, the mouse placement input, when the mouse placement event is determines it's been in a valid spot in the D zone, it'll prompt you to take the shot. It'll say hold space to charge the shot. And then when you're prompted to charge the shot, this is also a return part, so return part of the loop. So after all of the balls have finished moving, this is where it goes. So you get prompted to do the shot again. So we remove any old cues, add a new one, set the cursor to the crosshair, start checking for spacebar input, and we enable the aiming. And so after the spacebar's been pressed, we start charging the shot. And as you're holding it, you're prompted to release it. The cue starts charging the shot, and then input it check interval to see if the spacebar release is activated. And once it's activated, you shoot the cue ball. The cue goes towards colliding with the cue ball, and then you wait for the shot to resolve. We remove the cue, we set the velocity of the cue ball, and then we wait for the shot to resolve. And it has a check interval to check that. And then after the shot's ended, it goes through and determines if there's any fault logic. Like if you sunk the cue ball, this is the multiple colors sunk, where the message that I can't force to happen will happen. And then this is the fault that you do see when the color's not on. That you get that. But then after all is said and done, it just repeats either at the placement of the cue ball or prompting the shot. Those are the colors, and then there's some additional logic there for the events and the interval checks. So the world is a table. So it's just a table object. It creates the cushions and all that. It sets the sprites. This is the global resize function that you can resize everything with. The table has pockets. They're a subclass of the table. They're all created on the creation of the table. The cushions are created. The background's created. Background has the sprite image and an overlay. You can set the cloth and all that, and the image user interface. This is the kind of extension stuff. This isn't really graphical programming so much as it is web development. This is all DOM objects here, and that's just for the menu itself. That's just for all of these because it's a lot easier to have hierarchies and stuff like that than actually drawing all this stuff out and creating individual objects. You're using JavaScript, you might as well take advantage. These are the menus. That's just for creating individual drop-down menus, these things, and positioning them. And the fading messages. This is a class that manages all of those user prompts, like when you sunk a ball, you collided with a cushion, you collided with a ball. This just adds a message with a P5 color, a font size, and a duration frame your message where you want it. And then it just keeps track of them all. And once every draw frame, it processes them by iterating over them all and drawing them, updating them. If they're dead, it doesn't add them to the next list. But it keeps them in a list here, and they draw and they update. The alpha is mapped to the amount of time that the amount of frames that they've been alive for the duration. So pretty straightforward. That's pretty much all. This is pretty much the only P5 drawing that you do, other than a little bit in the table. Yeah, here you got a little draw markings. Yeah, that's which this is done in layers. So you have the background image layer, draw the markings over top of that, and you render the balls. Then you render the cue. That's pretty much the whole app. So that's my snooker app.